that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is like the internet is a far superior vehicle for finding your people than a random warehouse in Queens.
Kick it off. We got the legendary Jack Butcher in the house. How you doing, Jack?
I'm good, mate. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Doing well, man. So tell us a little bit about who is Jack Butcher. Like, who is Jack Butcher prior to Web3 Jack Butcher?
So I grew up in the UK, studied graphic design when I was, how old would I have been? 18, went to university in Wales and got an internship, studied graphic design, got an internship in London and was there for about 6 weeks or something. I met a couple guys in a pub who knew somebody who could get cheap flights to New York. And I was like, all right, I'll get on that. So I went on, I think I just Googled at the time, design internships New York. And the first thing that came up was Craigslist. I had no idea what Craigslist was, but went on Craigslist. There's 200 vacancies on Craigslist. Most of them are like, screen printing or handing out flyers or doing like, TaskRabbit type stuff for design studios in New York. And I actually got a reply from one guy who had just set up a design studio independently. He was like, worked on Madison Avenue for 20 years or something, and then ended up starting his own independent design studio and gave me a shot as an intern. And that was 2010, 2011. And I ended up getting a visa, moving to New York, bounced around the agency scene in New York for 9 years, working on all different kinds of stuff. Ended up founding my own agency. This is 2017 or so. I'm a huge car guy, so I got a dream client from one of my old corporate gigs, massive supercar brand, and I was shooting car commercials for them. And then COVID happened, and I was like, all right, we'll pack this in. We can't do this anymore. And just started working remotely completely then. And that's when I started this idea of Visualize Value, which was basically these images that would try and compress as much information as you can into a single image. And then just started doing that as a service for people. So anybody that had a really complicated message they wanted to convey somehow would sit in a room with them for a couple hours, come out with like a 8-page pitch deck that compressed the story into 8 visuals, and they could go out and pitch people or train their team or sell their product, whatever it might have been. And that was Visualize Value as a service. I then started these Instagram and Twitter pages, which were basically doing that thing, but for myself. So I would read something, come across something, like listen to somebody and hear something interesting and try and turn that into an image that conveyed that idea. And those 2 pages on Instagram and Twitter got a ton of traction in the first couple of years I was doing that. I was pushing out like 4 or 5 of these every day. And it had this like really, like in hindsight, this loop built into it where you Twitter, more so, where you could take somebody's idea they'd articulated and add this visual context to it, and they would amplify it, so you'd get some of their audience. And I grew a platform pretty quickly that way. And then built a couple education products, had this like community of probably 10,000, 20,000 people. And somebody in there reached out to me and said, hey, I really want to collect your work. This was in 2020. I'm like, I tried the print thing. It doesn't, like, I can't print white ink on black paper, just all this stuff. I went and did art fairs and nobody cared about this stuff. And I was like, and he's like, no, I mean digital stuff. Check this out. He sent me a link to OpenSea. This is in 2020. I go on the link. I'm like, what the fuck? What is this, man? Like, this is like some eBay, like, clone thing. I had no idea what I was looking at. Unfortunately, man, because I think you could have bought Punk for $50 back then. I just had no idea what I was looking at. And I was like, all right, I'll come back to this at some point, but right now it doesn't make sense. And then somebody gave me an invitation to Foundation, that one-of-one platform.
Yeah.
And that was where it all clicked. I was like, oh, I get it now. This is like digitally native, auction house, gallery, like curated. Like there's names of people that I'd seen practicing their craft on Instagram or Twitter, wherever, that were on Foundation. They had this referral system. Then it all clicked. And yeah, the last few years just went all in on that.
So every time you guys think that that it's easy to do this stuff, just remember Jack Butcher was looking for fucking jobs on Craigslist, and he was striking out at art fairs before all of this happened.
That's facts. Yeah.
So tell me this. I guess Foundation kind of made it click for you, right? Is that when you started doing your one-of-one art there? Is that how it started before you got into like Opepen and some of the other stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, so the Foundation stuff actually is interesting because when I first saw Foundation, I was like, all right, I can take the stuff I'm putting on Instagram and make that collectible. And the first piece I did was actually one of the more popular motion pieces I'd put on Instagram, as a Michelangelo quote. It's there's a inside every stone there is a sculpture. It's the job of the sculptor to discover it. And it's this like line animation that conveys that idea. And that did really well. It was like shocking outcome. And I then had the realization, like, hang on a minute, I'm like trying to explain all of these ideas, but I'm operating on this medium that nobody understands really, right? Like Ethereum, digital assets, you can own these things, what is going on? So then just like my obsession with the medium and the infrastructure became the subject matter. So that's what I started doing all the one-of-ones about. And that's like what you'll see if you go to Visualize Value on Foundation is all these pieces that try and tap into an explanation of the underlying infrastructure. And the most popular piece, quote unquote, was called NFTs Explained, which is two rectangles next to one another. One of them says JPEG on the left, the right says NFT, and it has a little blue check mark up in the right-hand corner. And this was back in 2021. I put that out, and that became the genesis for these bigger projects 2 years later or 18 months later, where, you know, those things are just a completely different dynamic entirely, because you have thousands of people engaging with them and collecting them, and you can build these incredible networks. Like Visualize Value did exist as a network before those things were out in the world, but way more disparate, and like the one-of-ones were pretty inaccessible, I would say. So you have a couple dozen people, and it doesn't instantly produce this network effect where people get to know each other and build on top of it and run their own interpretations of it. So the bigger collections came out of Checks initially, was designed as a commentary on this like inversion of speech that came from the Elon Twitter acquisition. As somebody who'd been putting stuff out on the internet for 3 years, 4 years before that, really seriously, and trying to get a blue check, I would like put the, you know, hit the verification process. It's like, have you had any articles in Forbes? Like you have, there's this like bizarre criteria, which I later found out you can just game. If you pay the right people, you can get your fake Forbes article in and then like satisfy the criteria. But I was like, I'd rather get it on merit. And then all of this stuff happened within the course of a few months, end of 22, whereas like these things are $8 now. And that's what I love about crypto is you can verify yourself in more ways than one, right? It's like the whole analogy here is like self-custody of your money. If you do something notable enough, if the market notices you, you can make a name for yourself. And the symbol is like an indication of like a reclaiming of that thing. Like it used to represent the San Francisco conference room where like we decide who's a celebrity and who isn't. And then overnight that switched to like basically the crypto community buying this thing for $8 and you know, talking shit to each other.
Yeah. How crazy was that moment when it kind of clicked for you and you start seeing all of your shit explode? You had told me like a funny story about buying a Bored Ape, and then you realized it was, you know, worth a fucking mortgage payment, and you and your wife are just looking at each other like, what the fuck's going on?
That's like the collectible stuff really came after the Foundation thing. So that's like the bridge between doing the higher volume collections and the one-of-ones, was like seeing all the stuff that was happening in collectibles, punks and Bored Apes. And that did just prove the community thesis on another level. Is like, yeah, obviously this is just a vehicle for the most ridiculous second and third order things to happen. Like you're like gather all these people up around an idea. In the case of Bored Apes, it's like there's a mentality that goes along with that. There's like an aesthetic that resonates with a certain type of person, and that just gathers all these people together. Also, like interest in this nascent technology. There's so many layers to it. It's not the same as like, collecting baseball cards or going and buying a toy that's a limited run thing. It doesn't have that. Those things don't have that inherent network built into them. So the benefits of being part of it aren't necessarily as sophisticated, let's say. And yeah, at the time we were like between places. There's no way I would have like stuck with the Bored Ape run to where it got to if we weren't in a very specific personal situation. So we were staying with family for 6 months or 9 months. So no, didn't have to pay rent. Had like, we were just, and I was just looking at this thing every day. I was like, what is going on here? It was like really, obviously a crazy time. Anyone listening to this that was around at that time, it's like not a replicable thing, I don't think. Not in the same format anyway. And yeah, it was nuts. And you convince yourself of a lot of crazy stuff. Like, oh yeah, why shouldn't
of
this
course.
Be yeah. Makes total sense.
Of course.
These, there's only 10,000 of these things. And,
right.
Yeah. Just nuts, man. And inspired a lot of things under the surface, where it's like there's something really special about being able to get this many people to talk about something, to build on top of something, to care about something. And shout out to everybody that pioneered those big collection formats. It's a crazy, unlocked a lot of crazy stuff for me personally.
So I got a personal question for you when it comes to that. So, now essentially if you're a founder, right? I mean, in the larger sense, you're essentially gauged by price, by floor price, by coin price, by whatever. As unfair as it is, that's the way the market rolls, right? And so NFTs have been in the shitter for quite a while now. Meme coin mania has started, NFTs were essentially the original, they were essentially meme coins with pictures, with artwork attached to them. What do you see in the current NFT landscape and maybe going forward? And then B, tell me your thoughts on meme coin mania.
I think what we've tried to do with the VV collections, first of all, like the acquisition price of those things originally, one was $8 and one was free. So from a like building on top of that thing, there was less pressure, I suppose, to like meet an expectation that comes with like a Moonbird price tag, for example. And the other thing is like, because those things launched in early 23, when stuff was already kind of coming off of the absolute euphoria, I now look back at that and I'm very grateful that was I don't think it would be possible to put that out into the world now. It would be possible, obviously, but it wouldn't be possible to get the level of attention and like people following the story for that amount of time. And my thoughts on just where things are now is just everything is so compressed, like 24 hours, 48 hours, something that has a narrative stuck with it for a week is like an outstanding result at this point in time. And I guess that's just like downstream of the internet and technology and how everything is playing out. And there will be exceptions to the rule, but the things that have sustained that has a relationship to VV is like they have these systems underlying them that people can come back to and contribute to, observe in different ways. Like Opepen, for example, there's something, you can go to opepen.art at any point in time and go and vote on all the submissions for the art forever. And the idea that these things are like have to evolve beyond, here are these, like a Punks, for example, to me is anointed as like a incredible historic artifact and collection, because you could argue who did it first, but they're like the best example of the early ones. And over time, I think the ideas that underlie these things have to be stronger for them to be able to sustain momentum for any given time. That's not to say there won't be exceptions where, you know, people might just make something beautiful that people appreciate forever. It's just a much harder game now than it was when there's only a couple hundred other examples. Now we're in the like hundreds of thousands, millions. Like the meme coin thing, to close the loop, is, yeah, like the less friction there is to launching something, the more, like the lower the barrier to entry, the more you're going to have to wade through to get to anything interesting. And you're in an environment where people's attention is so fractured that even if you are doing something interesting, holding someone's attention long enough to convince them of that is incredibly difficult too. So it's just a much more difficult, and it's, you know, more mature. There's more sophisticated people involved. There's all of that euphoria in 2021 is kind of, to me, is an advertisement for like, there is something like underlying here that's super interesting and different, and the form factors that people build on top of that just constantly shifting around, and is a new, different, shiny thing that you can get involved in that has that kind of potential.
Yeah, so the difference for me between NFT mania and meme coin mania is the cults, you know, the meme coin, you know, pushers are always, it's a cult, it's a cult, it's a cult. But they are much quicker to sell and bail out on a profit than the NFT mania was back then. And I think it's because it was much more so of a community and an online digital personality, right? It was a PFP. It's like who you're recognized as. So I just don't see that not having another swing back to that as meme coin mania fades away at some point, as it will.
Yeah, I buy that. I think the connection to it is stronger in a lot of ways. Definitely the thing that you use to represent yourself within a community of people that have chosen to do the same thing is like very different than just like a infinitely fractionable amount of the supply of whatever thing is trending.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at, you know, some of the most notable accounts on Twitter, for example, it's a PFP, right? And it's a PFP that they've had for a long time and probably will continue to have for, you know, forever, or, you know, at least for the foreseeable future. Tell me one pivotal failure, you know, whether it be in, you know, prior business or whether it be in Web3 that kind of like, you know, changed you a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I think every iteration of a business I tried to make before I stumbled on visualized value, there's a couple lessons. Maybe one is like trying to emulate the things that you have the like cockiness when you're mid-20s to be like, I can do this exact thing better than the person I'm doing it for now. So my original like motivation for leaving my agency job was I got high enough up in the like hierarchy of a business to see the price of stuff and like to see how they're billing. Like, wow, you're billing my time at this and I'm getting paid that. What's the discrepancy here? And I was just too dumb to know that, like, yeah, there's all these people that have to go to meetings to get you the information and manage your time, and you just show up and like do your work, and there's all this, and there's bloat and, you know, big companies and all that stuff. And it took like 10 iterations to get to a place where I'm like, I'm not going to try and do everything for everyone. Like, as one person, as even a small team of people, it's like you have to be like maniacally narrow focus to get traction in the beginning. Like, this is what we do. We're not going to change the output for one person versus the next person. We have this very specific service we provide, and we will not go outside the lines of that until we get traction to the point where you can bring other people in to help you with it. And I burned out like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times during that process. And it wasn't because I wasn't working hard enough. It was just like saying yes to stuff that I shouldn't have said yes to. I still, you know, it's a like constant battle. I still have examples of that carry on, but I've gotten better at it over the years. And you, just find yourself. There's loads of cliche advice around this, right? It's like if you're not like screaming to say yes to something, just don't do it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, that's probably one of my biggest failures just throughout my business life is I've always wanted to do like, something else and then something else and then something else because I get bored. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I look back after like 2 failures and I go, fuck, I should have just stuck with what I was really having a lot of success with, even though I got bored with it. You know what I mean? But tell me about like, give me the positives and the negatives of working in Web3, because it's totally different from Web 2. You now have this community of people that want access to you 24/7, right? 7 days a week. Like when you're at a job, especially if you're working for somebody else, you can kind of cut it off at a certain time and then go do your thing and then go back to work the next day. But Web3 is just not built that fucking way.
Yeah. No, I mean, you articulated it, the big difference is that I guess the pro and the con basically live on the same side of the coin. It's like you do everything publicly and you can get feedback in 5 seconds, but getting feedback in 5 seconds is not always the feedback you want to hear, right? So it's like somebody told me once, it's like basically the closer you are to reality, and this, like in my mind, that this is a great example of that, is like the harder it feels in the short term, but the better it ends up in the long term, because you're not protected by these layers of bureaucracy that are like, in 3 months, maybe you find out what you didn't work. We're like, that didn't work. Literally, somebody is telling you that like you made the wrong move. And there's like, I've made some conscious decisions along the way where like none of the VV stuff has Discord. So it's like, all my interaction goes through Twitter. And that, like, in hindsight, was an incredible decision, because it's like, it's communicated what's happening publicly. If anybody wants to, like, understand better, like, just go and read the feed. It's not like these conversations that get taken out of context. And I think that's one of the best decisions in hindsight, is just to, like, have all of this stuff documented publicly. And that was like true of what I was doing before I knew what an NFT was even, is like visualized value as a service and a product business was just built fully transparently in public, and carried a lot of those lessons with me into this stuff. And yes, it's I would say 99% positive for me too. Like I've had a pretty great experience overall, and like met some of my, what I would consider like best friends now through doing this stuff. Live all over the place, and it's great.
Yeah, it is one of the cooler parts of crypto. Is like I have met some of my best friends through it. You kind of travel together, you meet together, whether it be at a conference or something else, and it just opens you up to a lot of like-minded people, right? That kind of understands you, where your neighbors are going to have no fucking clue what you're talking about if you go into a certain conversation.
And that's like what I experienced. That's what I experienced with the art fair thing. Like I had a decent following on the internet, and then somebody reached out to me like, hey, you want to come and exhibit at this gallery in Queens? I was living in New York at the time. I'm like, yeah, it sounds great. And I go like spent thousands of dollars trying to get these things printed out and put on the wall, and people just walk past like, what is that? Like, I'm not saying that's true of every artist's career, but it's like you have this captive, engaged, like thousands of people that have subscribed to every single thing you do, and then like try and take that into the real world without a connection to that is like, it's not even obvious in the moment. I was just like, oh, this is just, obviously people don't like this. It's like, that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is like, the internet is a far superior vehicle for finding your people than a random warehouse in Queens.
Yeah, no, 100% right. I mean, it's more reach, and there's people that are like-minded that you can have those discussions with, and that understand what you're doing. Yeah, it's a totally different world. All right, tell me this: how do you avoid burnout at this point? I know you got a beautiful young family. You're being pulled in 100 different directions. Like, how do you gauge your time? Because that's something that I struggle with just on a daily basis.
Yeah, man. I don't know if there's a good answer for this. It's just it's like work like a lion. Naval, the guy that started Angel List, is like this quote, work like a lion. It's like you have these like massive periods of intensity, and then I'm not very good at this, but try and shut stuff off for a couple hours a day, whatever it might be. And I've tried to design stuff too where it's not, I don't have like synchronous responsibilities. Like this stuff is not on a, and that's just a personal decision of mine because I'm not that kind of person. Like I'm not a great manager of people. I'm not like, not somebody who wants to be on the phone 6 hours a day. Like the stuff that has come out of Visualize Value in the last couple of years is all like, you could do, you know, a week of intense work on it and step away for a month and come back to it. It's like intentionally designed that way. And then, man, trying to spend time with the kids while they're tiny, that's been a huge, you know, that's a huge aspiration of mine, is to be like massively present while they're really small. And I do a decent job, but there's definitely moments where you're like, one of the worst things about it is trying to juggle it. It's like trying to do half and half, right? Like you're like, I'm on the computer and like, it would be much better to be like, I'm going out, I'm doing 2 hours and then I'm coming back and I'm leaving everything else. So the biggest struggle is like the full presence in either direction. And I have this very odd, unfortunate characteristic, I guess, where like the chaos kind of fuels my ideas a lot of the time. So like I'll be at the dinner table or at the breakfast table or something, I'll be, oh, like they're all going nuts and I have an idea. And I'm like there, not answering anybody, but like doing something on the computer for 10 minutes. And yeah, when I have like the afternoon to myself, I'm sitting there like, I'm not inspired by anything. So yeah, it's just a constant struggle, constant battle.
Yeah. Yeah, I have the same problem. I thrive under stress. So I feel like subconsciously I just put stress on myself so that I just like get it going to the next gear. And it's all my fucking fault. There's nobody I can blame about that. You know, I can literally just turn off Twitter, turn off Telegram, turn off Discord and disappear for 2 days. And it's not going to make a fucking difference in my life. Right. But yet there's times I just can't do it because I just thrive in the chaos. Like you were saying.
Yeah. I think it's, that is the real mastery is like trying to, well, it's both. I think the idea of when you're inspired or when an idea comes, it's like, it will be gone if you don't put it down, man. So that's like, I've learned that the hard way too, of like, I'll just do it tomorrow. And then what was I thinking about? I can't remember. Yeah.
100%. I do it all the time. I'm like trying to listen to one of my kids and I've got this idea and then I'm like listening. And then 5 minutes into that fucking conversation, I was like, oh, I had a banger, but can't remember what it is now.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Man.
That's life. Yeah.
Constant struggle.
Well, congratulations on the new baby. I know you got a great family. Spend as much time with them as you can, man. You know, Twitter will be there tomorrow.
I know, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I will.
But believe me, I'm the worst. You know, mine are older now, and so now I have to look back and be like, fuck. You know, I shouldn't have put in 70 hours a week over the last decade. You know what I mean? Like I shouldn't have. And if you have like that unsettling guilt, that's just, yeah, not a fun thing. But you know, you do what you can. Yeah. So one last thing for the younger guys, right? We're both a little more experienced, a little more successful, but you got a lot of young guys that are getting into the crypto community specifically. Just give one piece of advice of like either just get out there and do it, or how can they get involved and do their own projects? Because like you said earlier, it is so noisy right now that it is so hard to launch your own thing. So like, what is your piece of advice to somebody that either A, wants to launch their own thing, or B, just get involved in an overall community to learn and grow?
Well, I think I've been saying this for a couple of years, and one of the, like, Opepen specifically is designed based on this idea. It's like, find a network that has people that you resonate with, like whether it's, you know, aligned with a hobby of yours, or like philosophically people are interesting, or when you listen to that group of people on a Spaces or whatever it might be, that's like, oh, those are my people. And then just go out and contribute to that network. So I did this thing. I made this curriculum a couple of years ago. It's called Permissionless Apprentice. It's $1, and it has a 200% money back guarantee. So if you go and get that, but basically it's about that. It's like the infinite possibilities of like, I describe it as proof of work, but in a different sense. Like build a portfolio, put proof of work out there. Like if you're able to show people what you're capable of, the second and third order effects of that are so unbelievable. But specifically, like in crypto, you have a captive audience. Like you have people that are already so interested in that thing that they've like committed some economic energy towards a digital object that represents their ownership of the thing. That's so much easier to get in front of them and get their attention if you're doing something interesting that's related to that. So Opepen, the very basic example is like, what is your version of this thing? What's your take on this? And a lot of artists have gotten a ton of exposure on the rest of their body of work by tapping into that network that already has this captive audience of people that are like, I've studied the constraint of this thing. I know the, like, how clever, how interesting, how different can you interpret this thing? And then the things that come from your contributions are, you won't know what those things will be, but based on what you get out, what you put in, you choose your cliche basically. But I do think this is a better vehicle than the systems that existed 5-10 years ago, where you're essentially doing that and trying to get a job at a company, right? As a designer, that was always the like, do a permissionless redesign of the Facebook news feed and then try and get somebody at Facebook to see it. This is a like way more accessible version of that, where it's like, what's an improvement you could suggest to, Protocol X or Project Y? Like there's a lot of unknown outcomes that can come from doing that.
That's one of the cooler parts of Web3 to me. And it's one thing that I really focus with on Pandas myself is like just trying to teach the younger guys about networking, right? Because networking is so important. And you can do it to a certain degree online, but that face-to-face meeting can never be replaced. That face-to-face hangout, whether you're just in a fucking pub having beers or whether you're in at a football game or something, like those couple of hours together in person allow each other to really feel each other out much more so than a Telegram conversation. So I always try to push that and explain that to these guys. Like there's a reason, like, the golf course used to be the way for all the business guys to get together, right? Because they'd sit around and drink beer and talk shit for 4 hours. You get to know somebody that way. So, but that's one of the cooler things that Web3 provides is those opportunities. Like get out there, meet those people. Like maybe if you're a single girl in Web3, don't do it by yourself. But like in general, meetups and things like that, I think are a huge benefit, that come along with the communities.
Agreed.
So appreciate you, brother. Glad you came on, the legendary Jack Butcher, dropping some insight for everybody. A pleasure as always.
Mate, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.